Welcome to Bear Archery's Hunting 101 podcast, where hunters new and old come to learn and find inspiration from stories of hunts gone by. Everyone is welcome to enjoy the outdoor way of life, and there is no better time to start than right now. So let's head into the great outdoors with your host, Dylan Ray.
Always presented by our friends over at ScentLock. I am a big fan of Alone. I've had Jordan Jonas on the show, and now I have another special guest, Mr. Clay Hayes, who was this past season winner of Alone. Clay, how are you, man? I'm trying to figure out why it's 65 degrees in January. I know that.
It's been a strange year.
January 20th, 24th, right there before Christmas, and we had 70-degree days, and we're like, how in the crap do you hunt late-season whitetails when it's 70 degrees?
For our late-season bow hunt in December, and there was absolutely no snow at all. And that hunt is very weather dependent. So without snow, you don't have deer. So for the first 10 days or so we were there, it was pretty scarce. We finally got some snow and the deer moved in, but for the last 2-3 days or so.
Yeah, it's been crazy, man. And I actually talked a few episodes back, and we talked about how the whitetail rut was so, I don't know, prolonged, but never like full in effect, because they kept having these weird weather switches, and it'd be 10 degrees one day and then back up to 70 for a week, and it would just kind of push them in, but then pull them back out. And, a lot of just pushing and tending does, but never like really full on rutting, and just a crazy year all around, man.
Yeah. Even back in the summer, like throughout the West, especially up in our part of the country in Idaho, it was like I talked to one of my neighbors who lived there for 84 years, I think. He said it's the driest summer he had ever seen in his life. He'd been there his whole life. And then now this winter, after we got down here, I guess just a couple weeks ago, they got like 18 inches of snow, which is the most snow. I've never seen that much. I've been there for 10 years. Yeah. That's kind of weird, that big a dump followed by, right on the heels of the driest summer on record.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, before we jump in, let me give a quick kind of introduction to this. So I began shooting a traditional bow about 18 months ago. And when you begin looking into traditional shooting tips and how to shoot a bow, the name Clay Hayes pops up pretty much at the top of the list. Last year, not this time. The summer of last year, we did a traditional 101 series where we walked through all the ins and outs of shooting a recurve. And we actually did a really fun episode with Clay, Aaron Schneider, Jim Willems, and Fred Eichler to just kind of tell fun hunting stories and how they all got into shooting a recurve. And so into my journey into shooting a recurve, spent a lot of time taking on information from Clay. Actually, Clay last year, in opening day in Missouri, shot my first whitetail with a recurve, still in full velvet, so that was really cool. But so I started digesting all of this information, and at the same time, I was kind of falling in love with the show Alone. Then I catch wind, and it was funny. I don't know if you remember this, Clay. You probably don't, but when we did that episode with those 4 guys, you said I didn't get to hunt much because of another project I was working on, and I was like, well, that's weird. Why would Clay not be hunting? Because pretty much any project he would be doing would be hunting. And Aaron Schneider said, I know. And so I was like, what in the world is this? And then, of course, Alone announced the season the season contestants, and I'm like, okay, now it makes sense. And then as the show began, I was like, well, if Clay didn't get to hunt much, he must have went pretty stinking far in the show, or he would have went back home and started hunting. So that's kind of how all this came about. Walk us through kind of, well, let's just start at your packing list. Like, what do you pack to go on alone? What did you pack to go on alone, I should say?
I always forget something. So you get 10 basic items, like your survival items, right? Let's see if I can remember this. I took my bow and arrow, of course. Took a Dutch oven, 2-quart anodized aluminum Dutch. I took a big fold-out silky saw, like the Katana Boy. I think it's almost the biggest fold-out saw they make. That thing's awesome. Took fishing line and hooks, sleeping bag, snare wire. Heck, I'm leaving a couple of them off. Leatherman, an axe, and what else? I can't remember I'll probably think of it before too long, but that was the gist of my my 10 items. And then of course you've got they allow you ample clothing. And so I had 2 pair of boots. I had a pair of late winter pack boots, and I had a pair of light hikers. They give you, I had a Faro rod. That's right. Liz come over here and reminded me. She remembers what I took. But you get your clothing, all your base layers, your couple of different jackets, pullover, different things like that. So I had lots of clothes with me.
Now, I've always wanted to ask contestants this, and I should have asked Jordan on, if you could have picked any item, restricted or not, like if you could add any one additional item, a GPS, a gun, whatever it might be, what's that one item that you would add to that list?
I'd have taken a beef cow with me.
Now, I'll tell you what. I don't know how to say this without making people mad, but it's going to make people mad. So I don't care. It came down to you and Biko. The reason I was so upset of this was Biko really didn't do well on the show. Never killed any animals, never caught any fish. Didn't do well. He was just really overweight. So he had a lot of weight to lose. And I think if I could pick one prime example to drive this point home, it would be him. Because I think every 10 pounds overweight you are should count as an item.
Well, I mean, it's a viable survival strategy, right? I mean, I tried to gain weight. I did gain some. I was able to gain about 20 pounds before I went on, which is put me at 180 pounds, which is way, way heavier than I've ever been before. And so I think everybody kind of tries it. It's just easier for some people to put that stuff on than others. And for some people, it comes off really quick. And that's,
right.
I'm one of those people. I think, so my normal body weight is about 160 pounds, and I went in at 180. And I that extra 20 pounds I lost in 20 days.
Wow. Now, I've thought about that a lot, and I'm like, obviously you can't take a Garmin, or you can't take an InReach, or you can't take, a gun, you can't take, all these certain things, and I've thought, but if nothing was off limits, like what's the one additional item that would make the biggest amount of change? And obviously you found success hunting with a recurve, and you hunt with a recurve anyway, so I don't think it would have been a gun for you. But I've thought about that maybe more than I even should. And I think for me it would probably come down to a GPS, because you would be more open to going further, staying out longer, or whatever it might be. Or maybe even like a flashlight. I don't know. But no, that's been on my mind, and don't really know why. But one thing I want to ask you about, and I don't know, how the show lays it out. I don't know if it really was right when you got there. But you saw the mountain lion like day one. What did that give you? What kind of indications did that give you about where you were at?
Well, I've been in the Western Mountains for, I guess first I moved out there in 2007, and I've been all over the Idaho backcountry, and I've seen a few lions over dogs, but I'd never seen one like that. You know, I'd never seen one just out kind of doing their thing, especially sneaking up on you. And that cat was less than 20 yards away. I mean, he was very close to me. And so right off the bat, I mean, you know, you're in a wild place, you know, when something like that happens after spending so much time in the mountains. But I also figured, well, if there's a lion hanging around here, he's not eating rats, and there's got to be some deer around here somewhere. And there were a few deer, but there were not many. I was there for 74 days and saw two deer the whole time I was there, and I was all over that place. So, you know, that makes it, that would have been a tough hunt with a rifle. It makes it pretty tough with a stick bow.
Yeah, no kidding. How quickly, how soon did you see that lion? I mean, how long were you there before you saw the lion?
I think they edited it to look like it was day one, but I think it was like day 3. It was really early, but it wasn't right off the bat.
Yeah, they edited it to make it look like you took your backpack off and boom, you saw it, you know? Which is why, you know, that's what kind of becomes difficult about understanding like the timeline of the show, because they have to edit it, you know, to make it flow and keep it interesting. And so I was curious to ask you that. What was the hardest thing other than like family separation, but like when it comes down to like survivalist and hunting, what was the hardest thing you encountered there?
Inactivity. So, and this is another, you said you'd brought up the topic of editing and you know, how they lay things out. That can make it, and then you also said, well, Biko didn't do anything. Well, it's hard to, from watching the show, it's hard to really understand what someone's doing. Right. Because, you know, like I talked to Rose after the show, and, you know, she was complaining because they didn't show any of the fishing lures that she made. You know, they made her look like she really didn't do anything. And apparently she was busy making different fishing lures, which none of that stuff made the show. I done forgot what your original question was.
What was the hardest thing, like as far as the hunting, the survivaling, like the survivalist? What was the hardest thing that you encountered?
Oh yeah, that's right. So when they put my edit together, they didn't show the really the toughest thing that I had to overcome, and that was, I guess about day 50 or so. So we had a big snow, I guess towards the, I don't know, end of October, early November. And I went out looking for that lion again. You know, I went out first thing in the morning. I was going to try to cut that cat's track. We probably had 14 inches of snow, wet, heavy snow on the ground. I went out and I hiked all around my place. I probably put in 6 miles. And if you've ever walked that far in knee-deep, wet, heavy snow, you'll know how physically exhausting that was. And you think about doing that, you know, after 50-some days of eating very, very low, probably eating less than 500 calories a day, being very physically depleted. And so when I got back from that hunt, that day out in the field, I was wet and just, I mean, bone exhausted, you know, right down to the bone. And at the end of that day, I came to the realization that I wasn't going to be able to be as active as I wanted to be, because I could look at my food stores and I could see, you know, that deer that I'd killed, I could have ate that whole thing in, you know, probably 15 days if I ate as much as I wanted to. I mean, I could have eaten that deer very, very quickly. And so when I turned that whole thing into jerky, I rationed it out so that deer would last me for 90 days. And so I was eating, I don't know, probably 3 ounces of dried deer meat a day, plus, you know, some mushrooms and cranberries and things like that I'd found. Not very much. And so I knew that if I kept up that kind of activity level that my body condition was going to continue to deteriorate. And they had already warned me about my weight. And they will pull you if they come out and do a med check and you've lost too much weight, they'll pull you up the show and send you home. And so I didn't want that to happen. And so after that time, I really backed off on my activity level. And there was a couple of days when I took it like the opposite extreme. And I remember one day, there was one day that I spent 18 hours in my sleeping bag and just tried to be as inactive as I could, just to try to save calories to keep my body condition up. And that's just not me. I'm a very active person. And so for me to not be able to do the things that I wanted to do, that kind of led me into a funk. Like, I got downright depressed because I felt like I couldn't do what I wanted to do. And so I guess there for about 10 days, I was depressed. I was feeling sorry for myself. I was complaining, because I didn't have enough to eat or whatever, I was just feeling sorry for myself. And the whole time the camera's rolling. So they could have used any of that stuff that they wanted to. But what eventually brought me out of that or got me on the other side of that was so one evening we had a big storm come through, and it was one of those times which happened rarely out there, but it did happen probably 2 or 3 times, when you had a storm come through and it was like two solid days when I didn't leave my shelter. It was blowing and kind of this sleety rain stuff, probably blowing 40 miles an hour. And so I spent 2 whole days in my shelter, and then that evening was complaining. And the next morning I got up, I woke up and I thought, what if they use this stuff, my 2 boys, Coy and Finn, they're going to watch this and they're going to see me complaining and whining. And the thought of them seeing me behave that way, snapped me out of it. And from that moment on, I changed my perspective and all of my suffering ended. I chose not to see the days that I had remaining there as something that I had to suffer through, but as opportunities to show them how to overcome adversity and how to get through those things. And so it was just that simple change in perspective. That changed everything for me.
That's awesome, man. That's an awesome testimony, man, just about, remembering and a perspective change. I've got, and I don't want to skip ahead. Never mind, I won't ask it because it is skipping ahead. It seems as though, and I'm not taking anything away from anybody else that's been on alone, but everybody else that's been on alone has been survivalists. And as a survivalist, you learn some hunting skills. But you're just a downright hunter who went on alone. Do you think being a successful hunting-focused guy helps you on alone more than some other people who, there's people who don't take a bow, and I'm like, well, what are you going to do, Do you think having that hunting mindset helps you in the long run?
Well, it can, but not necessarily. And that all depends on your location and your opportunity. I could very well have just not had the opportunity that I had. I had that opportunity at the deer, and because of my background in traditional bow hunting, I was able to capitalize on it. But like I said, I was there for 2.5 months and saw 2 deer. That's an incredibly low odds situation. Even just to find that deer. So, yeah, absolutely. If I hadn't made my living with a stick bow, there's a very, very good chance I wouldn't have made that shot. And,
How far was the shot?
So, but it was 25 yards.
25. How far did the deer go?
He went probably 60-ish yards.
Yeah, that's you look at the situation, and some guys, don't think people who aren't hunters really understand exactly what you did or what Jordan Jonas did or what Roland did with the muskox. I mean, we as Midwest hunters, I mean, we go on our properties all year long. I mean, we run cameras all year long. We hang stands. We put blinds out. Even Western guys, I mean, they're scouting on Onyx. They might have boots on the ground one time before they go out, and they know the land better. They can look at topo maps and they can pull up these things and rut reports and all this other stuff that we look at. But you were literally dropped at a place with no hunting resources other than a bow and an arrow, and told to go out and hunt. So and I'm not saying somebody's just going to find themselves in that situation, but what did that teach you about attacking a new piece of ground on how to hunt?
Well, I lived there. I mean, from the day that I got dropped off, and so when you spend so much time in one place like that, and it's a couple square miles. I'm not sure how big my area was, but you get to know it pretty intimately, and you get to know who's coming and who's going. And I was over that ground almost every single day. And so when I saw fresh deer sign, I just went back to my experience, all the years that I've spent bow hunting, and kind of did what I would normally have done. And they I think they did a pretty good job of showing that. Like when I found that first fresh deer sign, there was my area was a huge expanse of high elevation lodgepole timber, which is a very low productivity type of environment. I mean, it's basically like, if you put it in a Midwestern context, it'd be like a plowed field. There's just it doesn't hold animals. They might traverse it. They might bed out there every now and then, but there's no food out there. But there was these little pockets of almost like a depressional wetland. And around those areas, there was willows, and there was like roses and different sedges and things like that. And that's the type of area that those deer were keying on, but they were tiny. They were only maybe 2 acres, at the biggest, half an acre up to 2 acres. And so found fresh deer sign in this area. And it's like, well, I mean, if the deer are in here, I thought about building a tree stand up in one of those trees, but it's like, well, you go up there cutting trees down with a saw and trying to fabricate something like that, you're going to run anything out that's in there. And when I found that fresh deer sign, I can't remember, it was the wind wasn't right or something wasn't right. So I just backed out. I didn't want to run the deer out. And went back later on and cut fresh deer sign again, and just kind of started still hunting through those likely areas, and finally, caught up with that deer. I'd actually bumped, probably an hour before I shot that little buck, I'd bumped a doe, which wasn't legal. I couldn't legally shoot that deer. So really, I killed the only legal deer that I saw the whole time that I was there.
Yeah, you couldn't shoot. Could you shoot lions?
Yeah. So we had to, we had to follow the local game regs, and that's fishing and everything. And so there was actually a 2 trout daily limit, only one of which could be a bull trout, which made it very, very frustrating, because when the fish are biting, you want to keep catching.
Right.
So.
You couldn't shoot bears, though. Am I correct?
No, and that was, I didn't expect to be able to kill a grizzly bear. I mean, I could have on multiple occasions. But I saw one black bear track cross my area, and it would have been really nice to be able to put out a bait pile and try to get that. I don't know. I'm not sure how I would have approached that, because I would have brought in a bunch of grizzlies.
Yeah.
But I would have tried to figure something out.
So you could kill black bears. It would have been nice
to be able to hunt black bear, but no, they wouldn't allow us to kill black bear either.
Wow. Well, that's what I was thinking. Like, as I was watching the show, I remember one of the, pop-ups or one of the commentators saying, like, black bears are not in season or whatever. And I'm thinking, well, that sucks, because you've given, like, that's the richest game in the area, and they're not allowed to kill them. Now, not only is is it the richest game in the area, but it's a game that's going to keep other game out. Like if you've got a lot of bears, you're not going to have a lot of deer in your area. And so I was like, well, that just kind of flat out makes things difficult.
Yeah. But I mean, the people that make, decide on the location and all that stuff, you know, they don't have a background in this. So they just looking for, you know, scenery, landscapes, and things that they think will make for good viewing.
Yeah.
They don't, yeah. I don't know. I mean, from my own perspective, it'd be more interesting to see people really thriving, you know, being able to be in a landscape that had a lot to offer. But, and they like the Northwest Territories seems, you know, and I wasn't there firsthand, but it seems to be a much more, there seems to be a lot more resources there.
Yeah. What was the scariest thing you encountered? You got kind of mock charged, didn't you?
Yeah. And that's what I was about to say. Like people expect me to say, oh, well, you know, when the grizzly charged, that was the scariest, you know, that was but it really wasn't. And I don't, I wouldn't have expected that. I think they may have used something like that in the episode, but when that bear came to me, so let me back up and just tell you how I got into that situation. So we'd had a fresh snow. There was probably a foot of snow on the ground, fresh powder. Just got it the night before. Everything was the trees were covered in snow. The boughs were drooping. Beautiful, like Christmas card, you know, postcard landscape. Well, I was going to go fishing that day. And so I grabbed a small little JVC camera and grabbed my fishing rod and went down to the beach. And sun was up. It was probably, I don't know, 10 o'clock, something like that. Went down to the beach, and normally there was a little footbridge across a creek where I would go down to the south to go fishing. Well, instead of crossing that footbridge, I just walked out to the beach just to take a look towards the north and just see if I could see anything along that beach. Cause I'd seen moose walking up there before, and I'd seen a few deer tracks on that. And I had seen a bear up there. And so when I walked up there and looked up the shoreline to the north, as far as I could see, just before it goes around the bend, you can't see the shoreline anymore. I saw a bear, and he was coming my way. And so, I wanted to get, like, I knew that he was going to walk that shoreline right past my shelter. I wanted to get some good footage of him, but I didn't have my good camera. I had just had the smaller one. I got a little lazy on filming that day. And so I went back up towards my shelter, grabbed the bigger, better camera, and turned the mic on and realized the mic batteries were dead. So I was fumbling around with that, trying to, you know, change out the mic batteries and all that stuff. And during that time when I was up there, like a helicopter had flown over the lake, which was rare. We didn't hear much air traffic or anything like that up there. And so when I went back down to the beach, the bear wasn't on the beach anymore. And so I figured, well, maybe that helicopter had pushed him back up into the timber. And so I went back up past my shelter. Now my plan was to go maybe get 100 yards inside the timber line and just walk up towards the north, towards where that bear was coming from. Well, I got up there about 50 yards or so, and I thought, well, you know, if the bear goes back down onto the beach and I'm in the timber, I'm never going to see him. So we're going to pass each other. So I went back down to the beach and walked maybe 100 yards up the beach. And then I was going to duck into the timber and just set up because I had a good wind. Wind was blowing from him to me. And so when I ducked into the timber, I made it in there about 20 yards and I crossed a fresh grizzly track. I'm sitting here looking at this fresh track, trying to figure out why I'm looking at a fresh grizzly track when this bear should be a quarter mile up the beach. And out of the corner of my eye, I see movement, and I look over there, and this bear is on a full-on run, like directly at me. And So I had my bow, and I had the camera, and I put the camera. I hit record, put the camera in my left hand, ran up. There was a big fir tree in between me and him. I ran up to that fir tree, set the camera down, threw my bow down, and pulled out my bear spray. And that bear come up and stopped, I don't know, 20 feet on the other side of that tree.
God.
And I couldn't really tell what he was doing because that tree was blocking my view. And so he stopped and was standing there. I looked around the tree and I saw him make a sudden movement. I didn't know what he was doing. I thought he might have been coming around. He moved to my left. So I thought he might have been coming around that tree towards me. So I just took my bear spray and sprayed to the left-hand side of that tree. And, it turns out he wasn't coming around the tree. He was just wheeling around to take off. He had come in and stopped at, whatever it was, 20, 25 feet, and then took off. And what had happened was I was walking down the beach, while I was up there fiddling with the batteries and all that stuff. He never stopped. He was coming. And I just, I got mixed up on how much time it'd take him to get to the beach and how much time I was spending fiddling with the camera. And we just passed each other. I was on the beach and he was in the timber. Well, when I got up into the timber, I don't know if he saw me or if he heard something. And when he was coming to me, he didn't look. The only reason I can say that that it wasn't scary is his body language. Like, he didn't look aggressive. He looked to me like an English setter going in to flush a pheasant, or a flushing dog going in to flush a pheasant. His head was up, his ears were up and forward. He was just curious. Like, he wanted to know what I was, and he was coming to find out. And so if his head had been down and ears pinned back, and that's a different mood on that bear. If he'd been like that, I probably would have been shaking in my boots. But when he left, the bear left, I never got the shakes, never had that adrenaline dump, like you would expect. And body language is the only reason that I know to explain. I mean, I don't know why I didn't have that, but that's the way things played out.
Man. Before we move on, I do got to give a quick thank you to our friends over at Three Rivers Archery. Clay is a good friend of the guys over at Three Rivers. They have long been since good supporters of bear archery and long since been good friends of mine. They are your one-stop shop for all things traditional archery. Not only that, they are a wealth of knowledge. So if you have any questions on recurve setups, they are the ones to call. And the best part about it is the information is free. You can call them and ask all the questions you want, and you're in no obligation to buy anything, but they know the products because they use the products. Clay, how long have you worked with the guys over at Three Rivers?
I've been getting my stuff from Three Rivers for decades. I don't know how long those guys have been helping support my videos for years, though.
Yeah.
Good group of guys. And I get questions all the time. Like, one of the most common questions I get is, what bow should I get? They for this draw length or that, or I want to do this with the bow or that. And my response is, well, I don't really know, because I don't know. I'm not familiar with what's out there, because I make all my own stuff and I shoot my own bows. But I always tell people, just call Three Rivers, let them know what your draw length is, what your budget is. They answer those questions all day, every day, and they can help you.
It blew me away. The first time I ever experienced anything with Three Rivers, I was just getting into traditional archery, and since I've become kind of a micro tuner on my arrows, all thanks to Aaron Schneider. But when I first got my first bow, I was like, I don't know what arrows to get. I called Three Rivers, told them my draw length, told them the poundage of the bow, and they said, oh, you need a 500 spine cut to 29 inches with 150 grades out front. That'll fly perfect. And I'm like, how you know all that? I'm like, okay, whatever. But that's what I ordered, and they flew stinking perfect. And I'm like, shout out to Three Rivers, because they nailed it.
Good deal. Yeah, they're knowledgeable folks.
Now, one thing that caught my eye, I'm a huge fan of Schnee's as well, and I noticed in one of the episodes, I'm like, he's wearing stinking pack boots from Schnee's. And you also chose, I believe, bear tooths?
I had the Timberlines for
Timberlines.
my early season boots. Yep. And then I had their pack boots for the late season. I actually had a recommendation from Jim Akinson over in Oregon for those pack boots, and I figured, well, if I'm going to be getting pack boots from him, might as well get my early season boots as well. And I wasn't disappointed. I love those boots. I wore them every single day, one or the other on that show. And then I've been wearing those boots, the Timberlines, for elk hunting this last year, and just really good, really great boots.
Yeah, I get probably the most question that I get asked is if I can only get one pair of boots for everything, a do-all pair of boots, what should it be? And I always say the Timberlines, because they can really, they're not too stiff to run around every day in, but they're stiff enough and good enough ankle support to run around in the mountains as well. And so I tell everybody that if you only want one pair of boots to do everything in, it would be the Timberlines. Used to be the Outlook Evos, and they quit making those, which I'm still bitter about. But the Timberlines are a phenomenal everyday pair of boots. Now, I've got a question for you on pack boots specific. Because I get this question a lot too. Why would you choose a pair of pack boots? And I know why you did, but why would an everyday hunter choose a pair of pack boots over a pair of like muck boots?
Well, one of the big reasons I chose the pack boots is they've got the removable liner, and one of the things about that liner, you pull that thing out. If you're out, if you break a sweat and you get some dampness in your boot, you pull that liner out, and you can dry that thing out pretty doggone easy. Whereas, a one-piece boot like that, it's just dang near impossible to get those things dry in there. So that was one of the big reasons for me.
I also tell people, and this would be another big reason, is like muck boots. If you're doing any kind of hiking or walking long distances or climbing anything, or you don't want muck boots. So I always say, like, if I'm walking to a duck blind and I'm going to get in a little bit of water, I'll wear my mucks. Or if I'm walking to a tree stand 600 yards in Kansas, I'll wear muck boots. But if you've got to walk 2 miles and go over some terrain, you want the pack boots because it's going to offer more ankle support. It's built like a more like a hiker than a muck boot is. And so if you have to put in any kind of distances or any kind of terrain, always go with a pack boot over a muck boot. Now,
yeah, I agree on all the above.
On the flip side, though, leather holds more scent. So if I'm going to a tree stand and I can get away, like I said, if I have to walk 2 miles in, and some of the places I hunt in Oklahoma, you've got to go down some. I mean, not crazy rock faces, but I don't want to slide down them in muck boots. So if I can get away with wearing muck boots to a tree stand, I normally do, just because the rubber is going to shed scent better than leather will. Leather will hold on to the scent. So they both have their different places, but that's the reason why. And I was kind of excited to ask Clay that, because in that kind of situation where you're going to have to be putting in miles and packing out a deer, or walking down icy rocks to get to your fishing spot, like, you don't want to be wearing a pair of slippery muck boots that don't offer any support or any kind of ankle support or arch support or anything like that. So yeah. Now, Clay, how has this changed? And maybe it hasn't a ton. What did you learn on this show that you'll take and apply to the rest of your hunting? Like, what from this made you a better hunter?
I've been asked that before. I didn't know how to respond to it, and I still don't. I don't know. There were so many things that I drew, so many skills and experiences that I drew on while I was out there. And I don't know that being out there actually did make me a better hunter. I think it made me a better person in several ways, but as far as being a better hunter, I think I had those skills and all those experiences before I went out there. And that was that's what allowed me to capitalize on that opportunity when I did get that. So,
And that goes back to my first thing of saying, like, you're a bow hunter that went on a survivalist show. You know, a lot of those guys might have learned ample amounts of hunting stuff because they had never, you know, spent that much time around game or spent that much time pursuing game, and so they learned a lot of hunting stuff. But you were a hunter from the beginning, so you really refined other skills other than your hunting skills.
yeah, I mean, it's you can't spend that much time in the woods without just, you know, becoming better in tune with your surroundings. I mean, I got to know that place like the back of my hand. I mean, physically the environment, but then also just the cadence of the place. You know, there was it's kind of going off on a tangent, but like for instance, some of the animals that hung around my place, there was a pack of gray jays, and they were there from day one, and they had this circuit that they would make, and it seems like about every 5 days they would come back, and there were some soapberry bushes. They'd come and eat those soapberries off there. But when I started later in the season, all the soapberries were off, and I had some scraps, you know, like rabbit bones, things like that. I'd leave some little things out for them, and I don't know if they showed this in the show or not, but I had one day when I was sitting out in front of my shelter and had some rabbit guts, and I was basically hand feeding these birds. I mean, they'd become accustomed to me, and they were just hopping all around right at my feet.
That's awesome. Now, one question I've got for you, and I don't know, I've just wondered. Most of the winters, their spouse shows up to pick them up. Why did your wife not come to pick you up?
They wouldn't let her. It's the COVID. The border was closed at that time.
That's what I figured.
Yeah, and people, people. We put out a video. I don't know, shortly after the final episode aired, and it showed me coming home and all that stuff, and showed like where they set it up was I called her on the sat phone, and people were jumping on her. Oh, how could you not go up there? And, you know, they just assumed that she just didn't want to drive up there or fly up there. It's like, well, you know, she couldn't because they wouldn't let her.
Right. Yeah, and man, we experienced that. The border closing. Long story short, New World Record was killed in Canada, and the border was closed. So, like, we had a group of measurers there from Pope and Young meet the guy at the border and, like, measured it at the border. Like, it was crazy. But to announce the New World Record, they pretty much, like, measured it at the border. And I'm like, man, what people will do. But so you missed pretty much all of last year's hunting season because you were on a loan. How'd this season go for you?
It's been going good so far. We've went out to our elk season or our elk camp because, you know, we missed the last one, and that's something that the whole family looks forward to because we pack up a big old wall tent and go up there and set up a camp. And I think we were there for 5 days, and I think 2 of those 5 we spent one whole day cutting firewood and getting things set up so that we'd have enough firewood because we'd just stay up there the whole month. Well, I ended up killing an elk the next day, so we left somebody a big old stack of firewood at our campsite.
Somebody's like, man, why did somebody leave
this much firewood? Killed an elk and like, yeah, it was like a half a cord of wood all stacked up nice and everything sitting there at the campsite. But I ended up killing a big cow just still hunting, like the second day that I was hunting, which has never happened before. Usually it takes me the whole season to kill an elk. But got that done, and then we ended up coming down to Florida much sooner than we usually do. And so I've been doing some hog hunting and deer hunting down here. I shot a little white-tailed doe with my bow. I've killed a couple of hogs. Had a pretty cool hunt on an island off the coast where you're hunting under palm trees, and I mean there's like little key deer out there and hogs and stuff, and shot a pretty good boar on that hunt. And I went back out to Idaho for our late season hunt and ended up killing a doe out there on that one. And then just kind of been exploring down here, and got a couple more things on the docket. Going to be doing a float trip down here for long, exploring some pieces of some rivers down here that aren't easily accessible. So just trying to get away from folks and get in some more hunting.
Now, when's the last time, if I remember correctly, and you and your boys do all of your hunting with bows you make, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Dude, that's so incredibly fascinating to me that not only do you take it that one step further in their self bows, but you just said it. You said still hunting for elk, and so you implement one of the hardest, not hardest, underutilized, more difficult ways of hunting with a self bow. It's like, man, dude does it the hardest way he can for sure. And you found great success in still hunting. So what's one tip you have for people who want to start implementing some still hunting into their hunting?
Well, it helps if you can find a place where you're not irritating other people by doing it, because you will do that if there's other hunters around.
You know that from experience, huh?
Slipping around the woods in prime time. Yeah, when folks are trying to sit on their stands. So like down here in the South, I mean, there's lots of people down here, lots of hunters on public land. And so most of the time, like the hog hunting that I do, I just wait until I either go somewhere where I'm confident there's not going to be anybody else, or I just wait until after the deer seasons are closed before I go out there and still hunt for hogs. But with elk, I mean, there's very few people that are going to sit a stand for elk anyway. So people are out there walking around. So you don't have to worry about that too much. But the biggest tip, I guess, would be to just commit to it. You know, just say, okay, I'm going to take this couple days or whatever. I'm going to give this a try. And then once you got that done, just let go of time. Just slow down. Don't have an objective in mind as far as I want to get from A to B. Just go into some likely areas and just start slipping into the wind. And I could talk for 3 hours about still hunting techniques, but you're going to find yourself standing still more than you are moving.
Right.
Because the whole thing with still hunting is if you take 2 steps, if you're standing in a spot and you look and you listen and you look and you listen and you look at every piece of ground that you can see from that spot. Well, if you take 2 steps, then you've opened up a whole nother world that you couldn't see from your previous step or your previous spot 6 feet back. And so then you're going to stand there and you're going to look and you're going to listen. And so it's almost like sitting on a tree stand or sitting in a ground blind. You just, you have the mobility.
Right. No, I always tell people, and I've not found success in it. I don't practice it near enough, but I always tell people, if you think you're going slow enough, slow down more. You can't be going too slow. You can go too fast. In fact, most people do, but you can't go too slow. I had this friend of mine, and he decided that he was going to switch to a recurve and do all of his hunting this year with a recurve. And I'm like, that'd be fun, man. And then he tells me in the same breath, yeah, and I've already committed to only still hunting this year here in Kansas. And I'm like, dude, that's really stinking hard in Kansas. And you're going to do it with a recurve? I'm like, good luck, man. And it was like a week into season, and I get a text message, and it just says, like, I'm 40 yards from a bedded buck. And I'm like, what? And so it was like an hour and a half later, and he says, I'm into 20. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And I thought he was joking. Like, I didn't think he was being serious. And it was like 30 minutes later, and he says, I just need him to stand up. And I'm like, what is going on? And then he calls me. He's like, dude, I did it. I saw a buck. I crawled into 40 yards. I crawled into 20 yards. I crawled into 13 yards. He stood up, and I shot him. And I'm like, you've got to be joking me right now with a recurve. And he was like, yeah, with my recurve. And I'm like,
that's awesome.
And so I'm like, I'll be there in a minute, I guess. And so I go out there, and it was a nice stinking buck. Probably mid 130s. And I was like, dude, that's a great buck, man. And you did it your first hunt with a recurve and your first hunt still hunting. And, he just has it. He's just that guy that just has it. Because then we went on a hog hunt and, again, still hunting with a recurve, kills a hog. And then he says, I think I'm going to go to Oklahoma and try some public ground. And I'm like, well, that'd be fun. And text me again. He's like, hey, I'm 24 yards from a bedded buck. And I'm like, dude, I hate you. Like, he's just one of those guys that, I don't know, he's just good at it,
Yeah, well, any whitetail from the ground, still hunting like that with a stick bow is an accomplishment. But to kill a nice buck like that, that is quite the accomplishment. So good on him.
Man, and he's got deer on his wall that, I mean, he's got a 180 and he's got a 175 and he's like, dude, those deer, like they don't mean anything near what this deer means. He's like, this deer is might as well be a 220-inch deer compared to those.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same way when you start bow hunting. If you're a rifle hunter, you start bow hunting, or if you're a compound hunter, you start with a stick bow. Every time you bump things back a little bit and put in a little bit more effort, and have to overcome a few more obstacles. Anytime you find success after pushing through that hardship, and I mean, it just makes it that much sweeter, right?
Oh, absolutely, man. And that's what. I said it on the video where I shot my first one. He was probably 115. But being in full velvet, being my first deer with a recurve, I said, I'm like, this deer means more than any other deer I have on the wall so far. And it's just, that's why I always encourage people to take that next step and try a recurve, try a longbow, try a self bow. Now the same friend who did all that, he's like, well, now he's like, once I find time, he's a carpenter by trade, but he's like, once I find time, I'm gonna start making my own bows. And I'm like, dude, you're progressing quickly. And he's been tearing through your videos, watching your videos, but he's like, yeah, I'm gonna start making my own bows now and hunting with those. And I'm like, man, you're doing it. But I always try to encourage people. I'm like, there's so much more gratification found when you cut things back and when you make things more difficult and more intimate. I never understood hunting with a recurve. I never understood. I'm like, I would see deer at 25 and I'm like, just don't know, maybe if you were 3 yards closer, it takes so much longer. You learn the animals so much better. You get to spend so much more time with the animals. Because with the compound, you see them at 40, they're dead. Well, you see them with a recurve at 40, and you still got a lot of waiting to do. And so it just makes things so much more intimate and mean so much more in the end when you finally get one on the ground.
100% agreed.
Especially when you're starving to death and you need food.
Yeah, that does add a little bit to it.
Really, though, I told somebody that we were sitting there watching it with a few buddies, and I told somebody that, and I'm like, man, I don't think we can understand what that means to Clay. We get excited when we shoot a deer, but we just take it to the processor, drop it off, and throw it in the freezer. Like that means, that's literally means life for Clay. Like that means he's not gonna die, and of course, you wouldn't die, but you know what I mean. But that in that situation, that's literally surviving. That's not just putting meat in the freezer, because there is no option to drive to Walmart and grab a pound of beef. Like, you had to have that to survive. And I don't think people really truly understand. They've lost that connection of hunting and food, and it's just been lost upon us, man.
Yeah, I think that it's impossible to understand exactly what I was feeling at that, when I found that deer. Unless you've been in a situation like that, and so very, very, very few people have ever been in a situation like that. I mean, I've killed, I don't know, probably over 30 big game animals with a self bow. I mean, I've killed bull elk and whitetail bucks and big hogs and bears and everything else, and I've never experienced what I experienced when I walked up on that deer. I mean, it was like the way, I mean, you're literally, you're starving, you're withering away. And, I by the time I killed that deer, I hadn't caught a fish for a week, but the fishing had quit. I mean, it dried up. And so I'd been able to catch enough fish to stock up for, keep myself fed with like, and when I talk about stocked up, I was eating one little tiny fish fillet a day, plus some mushrooms and like some fireweeds and berries and stuff. And so I was down to like my last 2 pieces of fish, and I could not buy a fish. I couldn't catch a fish to save my life. And so you're already starving, and then you got your food. What little food you do have is running out real fast. And to be all of a sudden, like, you're worried about this, you can see the end coming. And then to have all of that stress just taken away, like the weight of the world lifted off your shoulder. It was amazing. Absolutely amazing. I've never experienced anything like that, and likely never will again.
Did you bring the head home?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've got the skull. I think I put it on I rebuilt the shelter that I made out there. Me and the boys built like a replica of it, and I did a YouTube video on that. I mounted it to the front like I did when I was out there on the show.
I asked Jordan Jonas if he brought his moose home, and they wouldn't let him fly it home. And he was already like at the airport, like checked in, so there was no like going to mail it anymore. And so he said I walked back out and like left it at the door of the airport. And he's like, it's hanging up on somebody's like old barn now, and like they have no idea like what that moose meant at that time. Like it to them, it's just a mediocre moose. But they have no idea what that moose meant to me. And same is true. I mean, no one can ever know in that moment what that deer meant to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little spike. He's got 8-inch spikes. Like, but that was that'll be probably the most memorable deer. I don't care if I kill a world record buck. That'll be the most memorable deer I ever take with a bow or anything.
I mean, not only was it food when you needed it, but that is the hardest, like that's the hardest way anybody can accomplish any hunt. To be dropped off in an area with no resources other than a bow, no time spent beforehand to scout it and look at maps. And I mean, that is the most difficult way to kill any animal right there, and you did it.
Yeah, I did, but the thing is, there's just like with any hunt, you need that opportunity. You could go out there and bust your butt, and if you don't get the opportunity, you don't get the opportunity. And that's where chance comes in. I mean, I had that chance, and without it, I'd be telling a different story. But I mean, I was just lucky that my life is traditional archery. I mean, I've been shooting a stick bow for decades, and so when I did get that chance, I was able to make good on it. So.
That's awesome, man. Clay, Fred Bear was big on his field notes. So I like to ask all of my guests, what's one field note that you've taken that I can take and put in my back pocket and make myself a better hunter with?
Persist. Just don't give up. So many times on a hunt, especially, I don't care what kind of hunt. I mean, if you're hunting big game, there's so many times, and every hunter that's been out there has experienced it. When you're out there, you're sitting and you're like, what am I doing here? Like, this is just, the odds are so far against me, and then you start thinking about, if you're sitting out in a tree stand, it's 20 degrees and the wind's blowing and you're freezing, your toes are about to freeze off, and you're like, man, it's just not going to happen. And then you start talking yourself out of sitting in there, and you go home. Well, if you're not out there, it ain't never going to happen. And so just persist. I mean, I could have talked myself. It would have been so easy to hit that button to go home when I was out there. But for me, that just was never an option. There was not any way that I was ever going to leave there without me either being the last one or them coming to get me because I would on the verge of death. And so that would be my field note, is persist.
There you go. Before we go, I do got to give a quick thank you to our friends over at Minus 33 Merino Wool. I'm a huge fan of merino. I happen to wear it every single day. whether it be a t-shirt or socks or underwear, I pretty much always have merino on. I know Clay's a big fan of merino. It serves its purpose and it serves it well. And my friends over at Minus 33, they do it well. So if you're in the market for some new merino, go check out Minus 33 merino wool. Clay, thank you so much for coming on. Congratulations on an awesome win, man. And I hope that the rest of the season treats you well.
Well, I appreciate it, and you as well. You got any more hunts coming up? That's pretty late up there, ain't it?
Yeah, I'm pretty much on the road now. As far as just got done with ATA and Sheep Week, and now we got SCI, and then in February we got Portland and Sacramento, and so I'm pretty much on the road traveling now for shows. I am gonna go after some axis deer in Texas here in the early part of the summer that I'm really excited about.
Well, that ought to be fun. I've never hunted axis, but you going to South Texas?
Yep. Southernmost part of Texas. And I'm really excited about it. I hear not only they're phenomenal table fare, but I hear they're really fun to hunt because they it's kind of like chasing elk. They have a roar that they do, and so you can call to them and they'll call back, and so I'm really excited about it.
Well, good. I hope you have a good time. I've never hunted axis, but I have eaten them, and they are phenomenal. Really good eating.
Yeah, I had some summer sausage. We were on a hunt, and we were cooking up. We had killed a bunch of javelinas and some rattlesnake, and I think one of the guys shot a whitetail. But we were cleaning up animals and eating them, and some guy said, "Well, hey, I've got some axis sausage from last week. You guys want to try that?" And we're like, "Well, yeah, sure." And it was really good. So I'm excited to get some of it.
Good deal.
Well, guys, thank you for listening. Have a good week. And if you have not checked out Clay Hayes, go find him on YouTube, Instagram. Clay, where can they find you at?
Oh, they can find me on Clay Hayes Hunter on Instagram, Facebook. If they just Google me or whatever, they can find my YouTube. Just get on Google and type in Clay Hayes and it'll pop up. And then my website is twistedstave.com. Got some different things on there that you might be interested in. A lot of bow building stuff. But that's it.
If you have ever wanted information on executing a shot, tuning a recurve, how to set up a clicker, how to find your draw length, how to anything traditional, Clay Hayes would be your man, and then especially if you've ever considered building your own bows. So go check out his social media and his YouTube and his website. But guys, thanks for listening. You guys have a great week.